Matt Watson is an Australian composer and multi-instrumentalist focused on the exploration of electronic sound and drum set spanning experimental, improvisational and traditional forms. He is widely recognized for his involvement in large-scale, unconventional orchestras and collaborations. He has produced records under his own name, along with several aliases, and currently runs the record label Eternal Music Projects out of Imaginary Sounds Fields. My name is Giovanni Grandi, and this is Let's Talk Music with Frap Tools. Thank you very much, Matt, for being with us today.
Thanks, Giovanni. Thanks for the invite to come on.
I usually start by asking our guests what their musical journey has been, because I find that many people reach the modular throughout their path, but few of them actually start with the modular. So I wanted to know how you approached the modular synthesizer. Where do you come from musically wise, and why modular?
Yeah, why modular? That's always a good question. A very brief musical history for me. I grew up playing drums, was kind of playing in bands and kind of project-based playing for a long time. So, I'd move in and out of different projects and different bands. And I loved that. Studied music, studied jazz, contemporary, kind of got introduced to Tangerine Dream and stuff like that when I was in music school. I explored synthesizers in the 1990s. I picked up a Korg Mini 700 and a 4-track, and I loved messing around with that, but I loved the sounds, but I wasn't really kind of clocking what I was doing with it, or they were just kind of cool sounds, and probably more inspired by, my understanding of it would have been from the perspective of like Herbie Hancock's, synth-based records, particularly like Crossings and stuff like that I really liked. Like Crossings as Sextant.
Sorry, but where were we in space? Which city are we talking about, or which area?
Oh, sorry, yeah. So I grew up in rural Victoria in Australia.
I see. About
3 hours out of Melbourne. So in the bush proper. It was a tiny country town. There wasn't kind of an art scene. I didn't even know what an art scene was. So it was just like you were into music or you're into sport, and I opted for music and skateboarding. So I guess, I was always kind of interested in playing music and finding my way. And I think for a lot of people in town in at that time, which was pre-internet, we got our information through meeting people. It was usually an older brother or sister from a neighbour or a friend would bring information back from the city, and they'd tell us about a venue or tell us about a band. Also in that period, which was, I guess, the kind of late 80s, early 1990s, what we're exposed to was very limited in the country. So, I always lent more into metal and stuff like that. And then, kind of fast forward through high school, it was, music and skateboarding, and I got into study music in Melbourne, and that was a really big move from a very small country town to the city. And there was not really any support for that. People didn't really understand why you'd go and study music. Like, there's no future in that. But my instinct kind of led me to Melbourne and led me to study music, which was like a jazz kind of contemporary course. And I studied drums, and as a result, also was forced into kind of tune percussion. So mallet percussion and stuff like that. And I found that I really loved studying xylophone and marimba, and that was a mandatory part of my course. And while I was studying, I was introduced to lots of different things. We were introduced to MIDI notator, so sequencing, using old computers, and working with tape machines and the multi-track. So learning how to multi-track drums and instruments and stuff like that. And I guess that's probably what seeded my interest in everything that I do now. That's where I'd say it was seeded. I mean, as a kid, I was obsessed with the idea of buying a 4-track recorder, but could never afford one. But would ring the music store every week saying, you know, how much are your 4-track recorders? There was a music store about an hour away that was, you know, and they had a 4-track recorder in stock that I never bought. But, you know, I kind of, I guess, you know, as far as those kind of literal seeds of ideas and interest kind of came through that experience. If I think a bit more kind of, you know, a bit more conceptual about it, like growing up in the country with the sounds of the country and, you know, sounds of the bush and all that stuff in the Australian bush. You know, there's lots of parallels between that and the sounds I really love in these machines.
Just a question, because it's the first time that someone brings up the metal topic, which is very dear to my heart. So first of all, it's not the first connection like modular synthesizer and skateboard, because our first guest, Francesco Gennari, actually approached the synthesizer when he broke his knees and he was recovering from a bad fall on a skateboard. So, but have you also played metal music, or was just something that you listened to?
As a kid, you know, as a kid I played, but not like when I moved to Melbourne and started studying music and was exposed to a whole lot of other stuff. Okay. Again, pre-internet, it's like the first time I heard, you know, Sly and the Family Stone, or the first time I heard Parliament Funkadelic. Well, actually, the first time I heard Funkadelic, it was just like, what the fuck is this? This was amazing. You know, that kind of crazy acid guitar riffs, and I don't know, I lost my mind in that world. So again, you know, it's you know, synthesizers and you know, heavily affected guitars and stuff like that. I don't know, I started to frame it differently when I started to study music and think more.
Yeah, it makes sense. But now that you mentioned Funkadelic, I think that I can hear some of that acid kind of sound in your patches a bit, of course, in a quite a different context. But that's kind of very, very sharp and bright and sweeping kind of sound. I don't know, but it's very, I mean, it makes so much sense now that you mention it.
Yeah, pretty obsessed with Maggot Brain for a long time. Like any young, you know, like anyone that likes kind of the history of rock music, you can't avoid that stuff. So, but you know, it's like Hendrix and classic rock and funk and, you know, across the board. So I guess that those early days, you know, when I was still a teenager, it was like you kind of just a sponge and you're absorbing everything, and everything was new. You know, and you're buying CDs, you're buying records, and you're learning about Zappa and all that stuff. So it was a period of like an intense kind of influx of new music, and you're just a sponge. You know, everything's amazing. Like anything in that space is amazing.
Yeah, because as being something like new, it is very easy to be amazed in that time, and I still I remember kind of the rush of discovering something new. It's like a very physical feeling that you can never experience again because of biological reasons also, and also because you become more aware and you become less like harder to impress growing up.
Yeah, it's funny because I, you know, after that was kind of my young years, like late teens into kind of early 20s, I guess. And it was soon after that I got a job in a secondhand record store, which I stayed in for a very, very long time. And it was one of the best educations it was the best education I ever had, because I was exposed to music in a way that wasn't like, it was exploratory. So, you know, I'd gotten to a point playing in bands and being an instrumentalist where I was kind of feeling a bit bummed out by it. I wasn't feeling super inspired. And when I got that job in the record store, you know, I would pick a record up and I'd come in, I'd pick it up and I'd read the back cover and I'd learn about, you know, I'd respond to things that I was seeing in real time. So, you know, it's like, okay, Morton Subotnick's Silver Apples comes in and I'm like, what is this strange thing? And I put it on, I'm like, this is the best thing I've ever heard in my life. Or, you know, in the around that time, this was actually in the early 2000s, there was a compilation called OM, The History of Electronic, I think it was the History of Electronic Music. And it was like a 3 CD and DVD set, and it had Laurie Spiegel and like the greats of 20th century experimental music, and did have a lot of some great like a clean sweep of the most important works of the 20th century, starting with Clara Rockmore and then moving all the way through. And it was like discovering things like that I stumbled across. It completely reframed my thinking about what I liked, So I think that was really the formative period for me. It was what was going into my ears. I wasn't being told about stuff. It wasn't, it was a period before there was no phone, no smartphones,
Yeah.
You weren't kind of I wasn't glued to the internet. I was like talking to people and in the record store and stuff. So
I think you appreciated more the chance. I mean, when you had the chance to experience something and to find the information that you were looking for, but it was also pretty much harder. Not that today is easier because of different reasons, I think.
Different challenges, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it was harder to have the correct questions unless you had a mentor or access to physical archive of documents like your record store.
Yeah, and I guess just going back to what you said, it is, there is a different set of challenges now in a world where you can dial up, an amazing collection of, you can dial up the quintessential collection of things you must know. You can dial it up almost immediately and have access to it on your phone 24/7. I think it's a different. It's very different. The challenge is in how you connect to this stuff, where it ceases to become, because when I saved up my $30 to buy a CD, or I found the record. It took a long time to find the record. When that happened, you were very specific about what you were looking for, and you handed over your money, and you valued that as an item, as an artifact, and it was representative. The physical form of that recording was everything. People, we lived for it. We lived for either our collection of CDs or record collection or whatever, or tape collection or whatever. And it was like really representative of who you were as a person, culturally, like all of it. It's kind of, it was like this amazing summary of that shit that you're into, that stuff that you're exploring. Whereas now it's like that relationship has changed dramatically because of that immediacy. It's like you necessarily, that sense of value around that thing is different. I heard someone talking about, Spotify just recently, and that they were, or just digital releases in general. And I was saying, how do you find, like, when everything is kind of reduced down to the same format, the same tile, the same presentation on screen? It's like it's a name and a bit of artwork, a tile, and it's like how do you kind of delineate when everything just kind of looks like this, effectively the same thing on the screen? And I know that this is kind of a weird thing to say because it's about the content, it's about the music and the sounds that are created. But I think that there's a different relationship to the way we experience sound and those interactions and those relationships that we build with the album or the artist compared to in a period pre-streaming, pre-internet, really. It's just different. I'm amazed at the amount of knowledge that someone can kind of gain so quickly about a thing and almost become kind of an immediate expert on that thing. And I think depending on the age you're at and where you've come through, you kind of, I don't know, it's just a different experience. I don't really know what my point is, Giovanni.
But I am following. It's quite interesting, and I think it deserves to expand a bit more on this topic because I once got asked if it was better to have like a limited amount of physical records, like own them, as opposed to having access to an unlimited amount of records that you do not own. And I think that there is a huge... I think that the question is biased, because I don't think that your degree of knowledge and culture depends on the ownership of physical objects. So I would lean towards the unlimited access even without ownership, because it's like ancient libraries. In the ancient world, like a book costed like an apartment downtown, so because you had to physically skin animals and have people working on it. It took like months to make, and not everybody could afford the work of art, but through a library you could grant the access to more people. And I think that it is also biased because of our way of seeing music as like through electronic reproduction, like something that can be played over, like something detached from the artist, which is true, but only for a limited time in the whole history of music in the human race, So it's not like everywhere. Like the invention of records has been so revolutionary that forced us to believe that this is the primary way to experience music and to make money out of music. To have a physical product that with a whole production chain behind it. So there is the factory that prints the vinyl, the distribution, the retailers, and like a whole, let's say, capitalistic, but not in a necessarily judgmental way, like in a capitalistic fashion.
I'm with you. It's like the way that we experience today because of the saturation.
Yes.
If no one ever made a record again, we'd never run out of things to put in our ears. And if we go full, if we go John Cage on it, we don't need to. We love the sounds of our surroundings. We love the music of the world around us. So I guess my point is in from the perspective of learning, understanding and researching, it's never been a better time. We have access to democratization of knowledge. There's no gatekeepers. We can find the information on the internet. We can find the records, on a streaming service. And I think the challenge is in understanding what it is that we are trying to do, what it is that what do we like? Like what do we genuinely like? We're not being sold things. The industry sells us stuff. In the old days, the music industry curated their list of like in the rock world or in that kind of, the capitalist music industry that cherry picked people and exploited them, made money off them because they were great, might have been a great band, a great artist or whatever. You're limited by that selection of artists that were curated, chosen, signed by the major labels. And that whole world has changed, obviously, as well now. Like, it's just a very different landscape now. And I think my point is it's not so much talking about that, because I think that it's unsustainable. If we look at it from an environmental perspective, I mean, printing records is not an environmentally friendly thing to do, right? But we all love it. All of us love putting, I shouldn't speak to all of us, I love putting a record on. I love taking something and feeling that, having that kind of engagement with that music artist, whatever, that I really love. And I think that the challenge now is that and I think the relationship to that process has changed as well. Like, people buy records because they have an affinity, they feel a connection to that artist or to that album. In the old days, people went out and they bought everything, and the bigger the record collection filled with awesome stuff, the better. Whereas I think people are more selective now, and it's informed by, in a world of mass saturation where you can isolate the artist or the sounds or the style or whatever that space, you know, that you really love, you can kind of, if you're focused enough, you can find it. And if you're not, then maybe you're in the broader space, you know, you're going to like big kind of pop concerts and stuff, and that's all good as well. But
I think that having no gatekeeping and having access to this whole like universal catalog has the incredible challenge of making it harder to build your exploration path, because if you had like a limited access to resources, you are almost forced to proceed in a straight pattern, like building on what you already know and then moving to the next step gradually and expanding your knowledge, like following the only access you had to that. Whereas in an unlimited space where you can move in every direction at any time, you really need a very strong will and a very strong education to build a path and follow your curiosity. I think that there is the difference that David Foster Wallace put between freedom of and freedom from. You know, like I'm being freedom to and freedom from. And because if you are free from the old gatekeeping, then you have another problem, because you need to know what you are free of doing, you know. And because they say that if you take a young kid and let him free to eat whatever they want, they will eat candies and destroy their teeth, you know. So there is this huge problem of building awareness and building knowledge and building education in order to get the most out of this immense catalog of information. Because otherwise it is very easy to use it in a passive way and just take what the algorithm feeds you.
Yeah, and that, again, it's kind of, I mean, you summed it up really beautifully, and it underwrites, I guess, the point of what I'm trying to say as well. And I think that, you know, without preempting this too much, but there's an amazing segue into the world of modular and the world of, you know, of system-based exploration and composition, and in a period of saturation as well, you know.
Yeah, so when did you approach the Eurorack format? Did you also play the other modular formats before?
Yeah, I did. So it was, I guess my introduction to Eurorack, there was two things that happened. One thing was I bought a Synthi AKS when I was in 2006. And that was an opportunity I had to purchase this machine from a friend. And it was a life-changing moment, because it was a machine that reflected all of this stuff that I've been listening to, you know, all the sounds I talked about before. You know, suddenly I had this like mystery machine that was just the most amazing tangle of sounds and endless possibilities that I'd ever had in front of me. And I used to sit on my bed with it on my lap, you know, with the KS beside me, and I'd have headphones in. I'd just like would be reading the manual trying to work out what the hell I was doing. And I still have that machine, and I'll never let it go. It's like the thing that informs everything I do now. So I got that in 2006, and around the same time, I think it was either, I don't know if it was Audio Technology magazine. There was some kind of audio tech magazine that came out, and it had, you know, the 12 Eurorack manufacturers you must know about, or something like that. It was an article that came out. And I remember reading it, just going, like, that's kind of like this, but these are like modules, right? And it was also just prior to that where I'd learnt about Buchla as well. And I remember jumping on the Buchla website in 2005. It was like late 2005 at a friend's place. and I discovered the lightning sticks. And I'm like, that is like crazy. And as a drummer, I was like, that is bonkers. I want that. It's like what is that? Like rod synthesizers? Well, I didn't understand, and I was more drawn to that than I was to the Buchla, the 200E modules, which had only been around for not very long at that point. And I remember sitting there going, there's a phone number you can ring Buchla and learn it, put an order in or something. So it was like those things that, and I was drawing parallels to the things that I'd heard, the records that I'd been exploring. So it was around that time that I was out and about playing a lot with my good friend Chris Rainier. We had a duo and we were playing kind of treated lap steel and AKS and drums and lots of stuff. And I just wanted to build a system, because I went, Eurorack's kind of the answer to my problem. That is, if I don't want to take the Synthi out all the time, I can build my version of Synthi in my version of the AKS in Eurorack form. And that was just like an endless search from then, realizing that you can't emulate the Synthi. That machine is unique in and of itself, but it led me to a very long period of exploration, buying modules and exploring what they did and exploring how they worked with the Synthi, and realizing the Synthi didn't interface too well with the outside world, but it was still great. I had my 2 CV-ins and I, bought like a mod can, quad LFO and stuff like that. And it was just learning about these interrelationships, cause and effect, do this thing happens. And it was a different experience because it was point-to-point patching as opposed to the Synthi, which was matrix.
I was
focused.
about to ask this very question. How was to switch from the matrix approach to the cable approach, patch cable approach?
Yeah, it was the opposite experience to everyone that goes from Eurorack to patch to matrix. So I was like, because on the Synthi, you've got your level controls, and like before you get to the source has a level, and then you get to a destination is already at that level, and then you add more level to it, or you mix and merge. So, it was like this kind of endless kind of feedback loop as far as the matrix goes, versus patching on Eurorack or patching on modular in general, which is point-to-point patching, requiring more attenuation, more conditioning of sounds and voltage.
So basically you started trying to make a portable Synthi, and then you embarked on a journey that is still going, right?
Yeah, it was a slow start. There was lots of tire kicking and lots of conversations. I had a friend in town here who was a very early adopter of Eurorack, around 2006 or 7 or something. And I would talk to him endlessly, and I was always like, I'm going to get a case. I'm going to buy, I'm going to buy this. What do you think? And it took some years before I had the cash and the focus to actually buy a couple of modules, and then that led to more, and then that led to more. And you're buying and selling and kind of finding, like, what is it that I'm doing?
I never thought about the EMS Synthi as a modular synthesizer, but in fact it is, because if you don't patch anything, it doesn't play, right? If you don't put any pin. So basically, it's like having a system. It's
a fixed system. You've got
a fixed system.
You can. I've got like a breakout box, which is a Eurorack breakout box, which is like to break out of the matrix, so you can patch it in, and I can. But I really find, like, don't mess with perfection. The instrument is complete, and to honor the instrument designer's intention and concept, like, it's important. Like, they knew what they were doing, and they built something that was really amazing. I don't feel the need, whilst I have that access to interface if I want, I rarely do, because it's complete. in itself. It's like taking a Stradivarius and augmenting that. You just leave it alone,
But you correct me if I am wrong, but you did made an album on the EMS Synthi, like focused on that, right?
Yeah, I've got yes. Well, everything that I've done and everything I've released has been focused on that machine. There was some, like a few albums which were kind of beat based. So it was like cutting up and taking sounds and playing riffs. I was doing like mono synth type stuff with it, which was wonky and, drifty and all that stuff. But that's what I love about it. I do have really specific EMS focused releases as well. Actually, and I've just finished one as of today. I just mastered a collection of pure Synthi recordings that I did between 2007 and 2014, and it's about an hour's worth of what I think are quite beautiful self-contained pieces. So I'll be releasing those at some point. Just sit with them for a little bit and then work out what to do with them. But yeah, to answer your question, I mean my path to Eurorack was in response to my experience with the Synthi. That's as simple as that.
I see. Because you seem to record quite... you seem to take advantage of the instrument-based album. I am thinking about like spin patterns on the buchla or reflective hits mostly on Frap Tools modules, if I remember correctly. So is this like, do you see them as, what is your approach with the instrument? Let's see in that way.
Okay, I can probably, I'll give the abridged version. I'll give you the direct to the point version. So what I love about these machines is it allowed me to fall into a very personal sound world and a creative space. And I loved that as a form of escape away from the music scene, the music space. So a space where I'm playing with people and collaborative and touring or, playing bigger shows, which I love doing that. But sometimes, like everyone, we have our, ups and we have our outward life and then we have our inward life. And this is very reflective of my inward life, the stuff that I love. I don't do it for any particular purpose. I'm not trying to write, I'm not trying to bend these machines to my will to create like a pop hit. I love archive, like I love going back and exploring, like, I don't know, listening to collections of Pierre Henry or Piero Umiliani or, there's endless. I mean, the Umiliani recordings are endless, and there's so many beautiful recordings of just noodles or like explorations in sound, things that were maybe intended for, I don't know, for specific purposes. Whether they were commissions or works for other parts of his practice, or were they just part of his general practice of exploring sound and being at home in the studio. So for me, falling into the kind of focused recordings where it's like, this is my, I did a record with 3 synths once. I was able to loan 2 other synths, another Synthi AKS and a Synthi A, for a performance, and for my and I released that as Triple Synthi Live. Now, it was just a document in time, and I was very grateful for that opportunity that came through Melbourne Electronic Sound Studio, and it was a beautiful night, and it was something that I kind of composed a shape. I knew what I wanted to do, and then I delivered this live performance of 3 synths through a huge system. So I released that as a record, and I don't know, I love the idea of working with single systems to explore. I love that focus of like, I want to get inside the logic of the person that designed the machine and work out how I can bring something beautiful out of it. And also to challenge the idea, because there's a lot of misconceptions around these machines. There's misconceptions around what the Synthi AKS is, what it should be, what its shortcomings are. You know, people see shortcomings in that machine. I see nothing but like perfection. I love embracing those nuanced behaviors of those machines. I'm not trying to bend it to my will. Like, I embrace the pitchiness, I embrace the funkiness of it all, and yeah, you're just kind of trying to knead it into some kind of shape. And so, yeah, for me, it is that escape away. It's the world that I can kind of create for myself.
So I think that this is a very good cue to edit your patch in and see how you challenged the misconceptions of the instruments. And so I would say that we can hear your patch and your patch breakdown, and then we will meet in a few minutes to discuss it.
The first patch we're going to hear is a video that I stumbled upon recently, and it's the moment that I discovered the patch which became Another Tomorrow off my record Reflective Hits. Let's play it and then I'll talk about it. Okay, so I guess just a bit about that patch. There was a moment in time, and it really reflects what I love about working with modular systems. It's a point where you think out. You're forced to think outside the square and challenge the way that you work with these systems. In that patch, I'm using Ooster, but I'm not using it to generate melodies. I'm not using it to generate not like a pianola roll that just whirls around doing its thing. I'm using it to create events. So, and if you look at that patch, you'll see as it's getting this kind of this kind of flow of pulses to drive it around. There's also different stage lengths. There's different gate lengths. And that is the thing that kind of drives or creates like the animation, the animated patch. It's a series of events, not too dissimilar to a function generator, or the way that in a Surge system, the way that those sequences are designed. They're not designed to be, well, you can use them for melodic programming if you want, but fundamentally they're like a sequencer is a sequence of events. It doesn't have to be melody. And that's what I love about that patch. It demonstrates that.
Pretty much like the maybe the Marv module, or like the idea that, which is, I mean, first when I approached the modular synthesizer, I was all about getting a weird sound and being all hip. So I was like, yeah, I don't need a sequence. I don't want to play with notes. But then I realized, and I was forced to work with sequencer because I began working for Frap Tools, so I had to work on the USTA sequencer. And I was, as I was writing the manual, I began thinking that it's just it can just be a random output or an arbitrary sequence set, an arbitrary set of value that you can play in sequence or not. And then I began using it more and more. So the idea of sequencer and notes being together, I think that it is correctly, like this preconception, he is very well challenged, to use your expression, in this patch.
I think, and again, I guess feeding back into the conversation we had earlier about music and focus and, all that kind of stuff, it's, education. This is not coming from a negative place at all. It's merely it's a statement of fact, actually, that, if we don't challenge these things, they become set in stone. So a sequencer doesn't have to be a melody. It doesn't have to be like a pianola roll that just like whirls around. It can be, if you think of it, in terms of it being a series of events, and those events are just voltage amounts that can be assigned to whatever you want, then suddenly it opens that idea. You can think structurally like a painter. You can think like movement over time, and you can I think in shapes, I think in like, sometimes it's technical, sometimes it's musical, but with this system, I think in terms of like shapes and timbre and color. And the beauty of USTA, which is different from the other modules in my system and the other Frap modules, is that it allows you to kind of compose shape.
Yeah, I see.
And that is then relative according to your frequency settings, where you're sending the voltage from USTA. Are you opening and closing FM amounts? Is it timbre? Is it stepped? Is it slewed?
Yeah, I remember that I was once playing live with a friend. It was like an improvised set, and he was using tape recorders and some groove boxes and stuff like that. And I had my modular synthesizer. So I said, well, let's glue everything together. Give me your audio output, and I will try to extract like a clock or at least a rhythmic consistency from the waveform. The problem is that he was saturating the mixer, so all I had was like a thick brick
square
waveform with no information, no useful rhythmic information whatsoever. And so I started playing the USTA, and because I wanted to use a sequence also like to control parameters. And I just set a Falistri to the shortest scale and used the end of fall output, and then I was manually moving along the sequence using my perception of the rhythm that he was playing, because there was no way to synchronize it. So I was like, well, it's becoming more difficult to use something that should speed things up. So I will just play with my fingers and get the sequence out of that. And this is like when I changed my perspective on sequencers, because you can manually scan through the sequence.
I think, the big thing is understanding that like with a sequencer like USTA, where you have controls over its relationship to time, which I love, but also that means that you can make some beautiful decisions to challenge where time is and what time is. So for me, I live in a space of 5s, 7s, and 9s. And what I love about that is that if you're sending it complex clocks, or you're messing with staging, or you're messing with in the same way that like say if you copy one pattern to another and you shift it around, you've got like a shift register kind of feel. You can distort your perception of time within the piece, within the work, within the patch. So I guess what I'm saying is like not defaulting. It's like when you open your DAW, and it defaults to 120 BPM, and you got everything midied up and everything clocked up, and you hit spacebar and you go, I'm going to make an awesome jam. But it's by default, unless you challenge these default settings, you're going to get the same thing. That's not necessarily bad. If you like, coming in right on 120 BPM and making 4 on the floor stompers, that's awesome. And there's lots of people that do that really well. For me, I want to break away from, like, the idea of being in this world is one of freedom, which dates back to the origins. If you look at the origins of, I don't know, go back to the futurists, go back to like, mid-century, and the way people were challenging.
Yeah, Luigi Russolo.
Yeah, like the way that they were challenging people's understanding of what music or sound could be. Was it, like basically talking about the sound of steam engines and the sound of, it's like they're challenging the idea of music outside of these European traditions. And so, yeah, I guess like I always have the origins of this stuff with me when I'm exploring. And I get bummed out if I make something too predictable. I get a bit bummed out, even though it might be satisfying in the time. If I'm doing something that's like kind of on the grid, I need to find a way to flex around that to feel happy about what I've done.
Yeah, I think that this sums everything up. And I was curious to, and this can probably also tie this patch to the next one that we're going to listen to. I was curious about your use of the joystick and other interfaces. I mean, how do you... This is like a genuine question, because I've always been fascinated by ways of interacting with my modular synthesizer. And as I keep saying, I have never found a satisfying solution, but I never tried joysticks. So I was, how do you decide which parameters are going to be controlled? And basically, how do you approach such a controller?
Yeah, the joystick's easy. It's directly related to the way I worked, or some of the patches that I work with the Synthi.
With the Synthi, yeah.
It's a primary control point, and it's positioned right hand side with a gate button as well. So I use it in that same way. I guess the first port of call, so I use the IntelliGel planar, which I love. It's the version 1, and I've had it forever. I got it way back, I don't know, a long time ago now. And the beauty of planar is it generates, so XY, so you've got CV out. It's got CV in, so you can use the joystick to offset and mix in external CV. And it's also a quad, like crossfader, panner, whatever. So you can have 4 in to 1 out, 1 in to 4 out, distributing to different sources. I generally, for the most part, I'll start with the CV out, CV X and Y. And the most fun I have with it is really just setting Brenzo FM mix to full, setting it to linear. No, I take the exponential off, linear, and then X and Y to modulator to green and yellow, and just whiz around and then kind of get a feel for what I want to do. And you can start to then incorporate things like when I move around, how do I want that movement to synchronize with timbral movement, with amplitude?
I see.
Yeah, so the beauty of this module is it's got a sense out. So I usually go sense out to the slew of Phelstry, and then take the slew out and then do a little offset in 3, 2, 1. So I've got a little bit there, and it just gives me a little nudge, and then I either send it to Kunze, either over filter or over the amplifier, or directly into the CGM. And it's a way of knowing when I gesture, I hear sound. And so take that same patch and feed it to whatever you want. Feed it to timbre, different elements of timbre, or ring mod, or I don't know, whatever.
since you introduced the concept of distorting the perception of time through the Eustace sequencer, I would like to listen also to your second patch, the one made specifically for this video, because it features this. I mean, as you said, it might be like a more conservative patch, but I think that it features like a prominent approach towards like distorting the perception of time.
Okay, this patch is kind of a simple patch, despite the vast quantity of cables, patch cables that you see everywhere. It's basically built around a duophonic voice, so a bass line and kind of a melodic line, so that would be this one. And then more of a higher mid-range. Melodic line, and you'll hear that there's some timbral modulation over that, so that's coming from Brenzo 1, the yellow oscillator, and I'm just using the faders on my Michigan Synthworks fader bank to control, to fade in when I want the timbral animations to happen. The bass line coming from the green oscillator on Brenzo 1. So I have two Brenzos in my system. This is using the sawtooth through channel 1 of Kunza. So that's basically the first two voices. The remaining voices, which there are 4 of actually. So one is just a straight kind of FM-y patch. Let me find that. So that's coming from Brenzo 2, and that's just being controlled using this planar, the version 1 of planar. The two outputs, so X and Y, controlling the frequency of the yellow and green oscillator in Brenzo 2. Along with that, I have a couple of faders assigned to FM and timbre as well. There we go. And between those two controls, I can kind of find lots of amazing sounds, and I utilize that with Reverb as well. Again, with just two simple controls there, one for an effects send on that channel, and the other fader, which just controls the decay time. And in this case, with this patch, I haven't got anything automated over the reverb. I'm just kind of manually messing around with the pre-delay and the absorb and the rest of it. Obviously, you could patch the hell out of Reverb and have it kind of animate to some of these sounds. So that's channel 3 of the CGM. Channel 4 is just a straight pulse coming out of filter 4, low pass, and I've got CV control over the stereo pan as well as pitch control, as that sound is actually coming from the green oscillator of Brenzo 2, so the modulating oscillator for Brenzo 2. So I think as paired with the FM patch I just showed you, okay, so it's pretty wild sounds. And then I'm using the inputs over my group channel rather than having it as an effects return. I'm using that as just a mono in for this one, and I've got a duplication of Brenzo 2, the timbre out, so the main output of Brenzo 2, going through a passive low pass gate, and that's being pinged by one of the Felstries down here. So paired with the other two sounds, this is what it all sounds like. Some of the sounds I've been making are quite harsh at the moment, but in context of the patch, in a performance kind of environment, you can really kind of hone into some quite nice moments. I will say with the way that I'm using planar as well is that I'm using the sense out. So the sense out basically is it produces a voltage as I move the oscillator. And rather than going directly into any destination, like anywhere specific, I'm running that through one of the slew generators on Felstry, and that gives kind of a nice kind of onset and decay to that movement. I'm also using the gate trigger, so if I find a sound I really like, I can just hit the gate again. Again, it's going through a slew generator, or a slew limiter. As I trigger the gate on planar, when I find my sound, I can just repeat it, which is really nice in a performance kind of space. All right, so my sequences are coming from top two channels, channel 1 and channel 2 of E.S.G. And then I also have a slider allocated to each of those voices just to mess with the stage. So by using those sliders, I can get a lot out of two basic 7-stage sequences. So I have the original program set up as a 7 kind of step sequence, and then as I move the slider around, it slowly progresses that sequence around and kind of starts to bring in those other kind of other programmed aspects of that sequence. So I've got Fumana set up in a really basic kind of in a basic way. I've just got it set up as on the SEM 2 of the CGM. And so anything I send to it is processed through Fumana, and I'm using the mod in, so the stuff that is kind of like activating the sounds as they go in. I'm using the blue noise output of Sepel. So I'm taking the sample and hold out of Sepel, which is clocked, and I'm using that to kind of animate these bands. So I've got a very select, at this stage, or in this setting at the moment, I've just got two bands selected. All right, obviously I can open them up if I want. Or really isolate it to one band. And then play around with individual manual. Cool. Just a bit about my system quickly. Mostly Frap Tools, E.S.G, 3 Felstries, Fumana, 2 Brenzos, Kunza, Sepel, 2 333s, 1 321, CGM mixer, which is the original version with the big knobs, so four channels, 1 group and a master. And then I augment that with planar for gestural controls, this Michigan Synthworks 16 fader bank module, which I've been loving. I can talk more about that a bit later on. And they also have a couple of low-pass gates, which are buried deep in here somewhere.
What struck me first about this patch was how you used voltages to manually shift the two sequences on the Usta.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a very good explanation of what you were also talking about earlier about altering the perception of time.
It's funny, when I messed around with this patch for a while, and I was like, I was really into it when I was doing it. And then after I'd recorded, I listened back and went, it's really kind of, it felt really, really locked in, really kind of considered. And as I said before, sometimes I get bummed out if I hear things like that are two kind of together. But I will say the patch was kind of inspired by those beautiful Laurie Spiegel generative compositions, and if you hear those, you can hear the playfulness with those compositions with set rules. So there's a scale or a key that she's working with. There's tonal or timbral control. So with the filter, so she's using kind of control over the filters, and then control over the decay of the envelope. And it's really simple, and it's like those recordings from the Expanding Universe are just beautiful. And they're the things actually I learned about. I think it's Appalachian Grove, which was one of the 2 tracks on the Ohm CD comp I talked about earlier, and that still stays with me as like one of my all-time favorite things. So the inspiration for this patch was very much built on the idea of creating a performance orientated system. And when I say performance orientated system, one that has some set parameters that I can play with to yield evolving, changing patterns, and to play with time and to play with space. The way, and it was done very simply, so it was duophonic, 2 voices, and I used these offsets, the Michigan Synthworks 16 bank fader. So the 5 volt, I just give Usta 5 volts on CVA for channel 1, and that would move that 7-stage sequence around. And so I had some hidden voltages there, hidden kind of values there. And as I move it around, the relationship between channel 1 and channel 2 changes. And if I'm also playing with the envelope 1 and 2, then its relationship changes, more sustained, more staccato. And then if I start to change a CVB or CV2 on channel 2, doing the same thing, and I'm using those sliders to kind of dial in different relationships, but melodic relationships, which also yield different rhythmic relationships according to the envelope, and different tonal relationships according to the filter settings.
I wouldn't use the conservative adjective for this patch because it is more familiar. I can accept that because it is grounded into concepts of melody and notes. There are notes.
There are notes in this one, yes.
Not that obvious, but I am finding. I think that sometimes having. Like being original with notes is a bit harder than being original with just making noises and abstract, like in a more abstract form. Because with abstract you can provide a key, and then people can find the things in the abstraction that you didn't foresee. Or on the other hand, they may be surprised by the key to decode the patch as an artist, and then they might say, okay, I never thought about that, now it makes more sense, and then you can build this kind of culture in the audience. Whereas if you already use a language that most people speak, it's a bit harder to be more personal, let's say.
Yes.
I wouldn't say original, because I think that being original is an unhealthy habit of Western musicians, but at least personal. But nonetheless, I think that this patch, albeit more familiar, is still a good example of the challenge, the way you challenge axioms.
You know, we're often our own worst critics when we listen back to what we've created or whatever. I think that as long as there's an awareness of what you're doing and an understanding of your system and the series of ingredients in your system and what you're using to kind of whip up this new patch, this new sound, this new work, whatever it is, that I feel like that is the most important thing. It's having a conscious connection to what it is that you're doing. So I consciously set out to create like that patch that we listened to. I consciously set out to make something that kind of sounded like that. It took on a bit of a different life when I was in the patch as I was exploring and refining it. But I will say that approach has actually also seen me finish another record.
I see.
Which was built around this concept of pulses and animations. So I was obsessed with the idea of pulses and animations. And it was built around, it was all driven by Usta actually. And I sequenced my Synthi with it as well. So that record's actually done, mastered, and ready to be released. So I'll be releasing that in early 2025.
Great.
I will send you a copy because it's really one of my most favorite rhythmic-based records that I've done.
I think that this is like a very brave move for an artist, because if you make a point of staying away from a specific genre or from a specific musical practice, it's a good idea to define your identity as an artist. But if you exaggerate with that, it's very easy to lapse from defining an identity to typecasting yourself, you know.
And that's, again, circling back to why I do this is because it's freedom. The whole purpose of these machines, for me, the point of being in the modular world and working with modular machines is that it offers freedom. I mean, you're kind of only as free, you know, in as much as you can afford to put a system together. You know, it's been, you know, 15 to 20 years of slowly building what you see with the Synthi. You know, it's like it's a slow process. It's one of gathering knowledge and experimenting and failing and trying again and learning and getting excited about things. So, you know, working with these machines is about freedom, and that's the fundamental reason behind why I do what I do. If I was more kind of focused on, you know, becoming, finding that thing, like I'm going to be like rich and successful for doing this one thing, which is awesome. I admire people that can kind of really just go, this is what I do, and then present that image and present those sounds and present that as your work, and go on to, you know, be very clearly identifiable for being that artist. I love that level of focus for other people. I'm focused in a different way, and that's one of constantly trying new things. So, you know, I've got a lot of recordings yet to be released. Things that are mastered and finished with artwork, I just need to release them. So it's you know, I've been in this kind of a beautiful period of creativity and feeling inspired to complete work, and then I'll have to shift out of that inner space, the inner connection to these machines, and realize that actually it's time to do the administration around around this work and release it and share it and work out how I'm going to do it live. Am I taking this out to play live? Am I going to take the Synthi, or what does it all look like?
Which is a very fascinating way of reflecting on your own work and to the relationship between the studio and the performance. Because another obsession, which I think is it can be very unhealthy, is trying to play live the exact thing you recorded. And I think that in some cases it's good. In some other cases it's just like a fake problem, because you just play if you listen to live recording of studio versions where in the 70s they're completely different keys, different speed, but the song is still the same. Nobody would argue that.
I think it's an interesting conversation because pre-transistors, pre-modular synthesizers, pre-systems the way we know it now. Tape machines were a really important part of the process of utilizing pre-recorded sounds and understanding that kind of step from the early days of experimentation with 78s and all that stuff as far as playback medium goes. Even thinking about the early RCA synthesizer, the punch card, basically a binary punch card machine. It's when you understand the history of electronic music through the 20th century, and the opposition to to some of the early performances of kind of machine-based music, it's quite challenging for people. And you kind of fast forward to now where, and I'm very kind of doing a big injustice to not talk about the many technological and cultural movements that happened between, 1948 and now. But, we're in a time where we have access to technology, laptops and samplers and, a myriad of ways to CDJs, a myriad of ways to kind of manage studio-focused sounds, things that we've created in the studio. I think that if you've created work that is system-based, like the patch we just heard is a system-based delivery. It's not hard to set those rules and take that system out and perform a version of that work. If the composition is as much in the patch as it is, the rest of it, then it's not hard to take that out and play around. People feel they know what you're doing. They know that if they know the record, they identify the kind of harmonic content, the melodic content, and the rhythm, tempo, etc., etc. If you've spent a long time carefully kind of kneading a patch into shape, and you've kind of recorded this thing which has overdubs and treatment and stuff, you're doing yourself an injustice to try and recreate that live. I think the idea of embracing the technology we have available and working out a way, where do you sit? What's your comfort level when it comes to supporting your work? How much playback are you comfortable with? There's lots of sound performances which are diffusion, multi-system diffusions of pre-recorded material.
But we mentioned your forthcoming albums, so I think that this is a bit of a weird way to introduce the final question. which is what could be the next upcoming Frap Tools module, according to you, if you could pick any.
I mean, it's hard to pick one, but I'm going to go straight to...
Oh, we can talk about more.
There's a few. There is a few that I have in mind. The one I would love is the one that I remember emailing Simone about many years ago, and that was like I want CV control, but I want big knobs. So in my mind now, having like a 3-2-1, which is more like, I think in terms of 3-2-1, 3-3-3 with a matrix styled combination of signal controlled by knobs that are basically like the size of Kunza. So thinking of it as a console. But I would love to see something that is that allows for some complex CV mixing, not audio CV. I mean, it could be both, but for me, it's like that soup of, I want to create like a soup of CV, and I want to know that almost like I could patch like all of the CV sources in my system into this device and twist some knobs and get an array of complex voltages with the option for offsets and inverting.
Yeah, this would be an awesome idea as well. As I mentioned before, my quest for the perfect controller is still going. So I would be the first one vouching for such a project.
I think also, I've always loved the touch plate interfaces, and that comes from the membrane interface on the Synthi. I'd love to see what Frap would do, because, you've got such a beautiful aesthetic to the modules, and the materials you use are really high quality, how that would translate into some kind of touch interface that kind of incorporated CV recording. So similar to the KS, unquantized CV recording.
You mentioned the touch plate of the AKS. What could be your ideal layout? I mean, are you still up for the flat piano pattern, or just like the Buchla 216, I think it was, with all the plates one after another?
Oh, I would love to see. I think that Frap Tools would do could do their own unique version of that, because
this puts no pressure at all on us.
There's no pressure. I think, the beautiful thing with the AKS or the KS is that it's scalable. So yes, it's a chromatic keyboard, but it's scalable. You can do microtonal.
Yeah, it's true.
It doesn't have to be. It's not octaves. It can be. You can tune it really. I mean, it's limited, but you can get some interesting relationships.
You can kind of tilt the range.
You can tilt. You can make it really tight or really big. And that's great. You say the Buchla one has individual. I think there's individual pitch adjustment per plate. Is that right?
Yeah, I think 2.
I'm pretty sure it does. Yeah, there's 2. So, and that's like a really interesting way to have, again, it's like a manual sequencer, a series of events. It can be pitch, but it's also just a series of events. The idea of a Frap Tools version of that, I think, would be really interesting. Like, as far as layout, I always love the Buchla controller. I can't remember which model it is, but the one that's like kind of ergonomic, that has,
Oh, the Thunder, the MIDI, the Buchla Thunder.
Yeah, that style of interface is beautiful. So it's like looking at, on the Surge interfaces, like looking at all of the way that that people make noises pressure points. I've always loved that as well. It's beautiful, but not big enough. For me, it's like I want something that that feels playable and feels like I'm engaging with the system. So yeah, I think with that and like a CV mixer, like a matrix kind of mixer, would be pretty amazing. I always come back to the fact with Frap Tools, like any time I think about bringing a new voice in, I mean, outside of like like an operator styled FM voice, or, you know, like a wavetable thing or something. I always come back to the fact that if I try hard enough, I can find the sound I'm looking for out of Brenzo. There's unlimited ways to kind of mix and merge, and I think if you're not satisfied with that sound source, you're not trying hard enough. You can kind of push it to the point of like and I think that everything is there with the, you know, the syncing and FME ring mod, self-patching, like all of it. It's yeah, I love it a lot. So I don't feel the need for those types of things. It's just more like how to bring that system together now.
Wow, that's a very beautiful reply. And with that, I think that we can cap it here for today's interview. It was like an amazing conversation, and we touched a lot of fascinating points, not just patch-wise, and which is mostly the purpose of this series of discussions and interviews. I think that I will edit my patch in after we say goodbye, so that we can see what I came up with to perform in the style or in the styles of Matt Watson. And I thank you very much for staying with us today.
Thanks, Giovanni. Appreciate it.
I articulated the patch on three main ideas. The main points I wanted to focus on were using control voltages to modulate multiple parameters at the same time, much like the conversation we had on his CV mixer and the planar by Intelligel. And the second element was to have a sort of brainsaw for the melody and a brainsaw for textures. And the third element was to mess around with the concept of rhythm and the tempo. So first of all, I took one output of this 321 and duplicated it with the 333, and I am sending it to 9 different destinations, and according to the respective attenuverter, I am thus able to have a voltage going up or down at the same time. So for example, the first thing is controlling the frequency of this brainsaw, while at the same time shifting down the clock speed of Bagai, which is sampling brainsaw at audio rate, and at the same time I am reducing the beat depth, only with the same gesture and with different amounts. The output is going to the first filter of the Kunsa and sounds like this. So this is with the knob fully counterclockwise. As I increase it, you will hear the clock, the sample rate going down and the frequency going up. I am also reducing a bit the cutoff frequency, like this, and sending more sound to the send and return. Other copies of this control signal are going to modulate Sapel's clock speed, which is clocking the Usta sequencer. All the 4 tracks are set to 1-to-1 and responding to external clock. And some gates are already modulating this sound through pinging of the brainsaw and the Kunsa as well. The second sound was the second sound is a ringed Kunsa by feeding it with gates coming from the Usta sequencer and modulating the cutoff frequency with this same knob. And together they sound like this. And the final sound is Brainsaw's final output, the other Brainsaw's final output, going into two filters on the Kunsa, both set to low pass. One is 12 and the other is 24 dB per octave, and they are passed in stereo to this stereo channel here. And there is some reverb going on. You can hear the sequence with a slow sound. I made sequences of 5 and 7. Just as Matt said. And now with the same control signal, I am actually modulating two different parameters on the Usta sequencer. Well, actually more than two. First, I am shifting the pitch up. And then I am modulating the variation range, so to vary both the CVA, so the melody, and the gate, so the rhythmic pattern. And the sequence is also speeding up because with the same signal I am also modulating the clock speed. So when the events of the melody are more sparse, we can hear more of the first droning sound and the resonant filter. And as I increase the speed, those dissonant sounds are gradually filtered out. There is something missing, which is an integration over the CV to the Brainstorm. Much better now. And with this patch, I wrap this episode up. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next time.